Next section on this lecture on globalization and its relationship to population health is asking the question, who is running the world? If we have a globalized world, who is running it? Transnational corporations or nation states? Now, I think it's important to understand that the objectives of transnational corporations are very much directed towards shareholders, where you would expect that the the objectives of the nation states is more to protect the whole of the community. So, and often the transnational corporations are not, the shareholders don't even live in the same nation. So you can see very quickly that there is a major conflict between objectives. And why would a transnational corporation necessarily be interested in the health and well-being of the nation in which they're doing business? If we think about the definition of globalization and the idea that it's an evolving process of interactions between sovereign states and large business corporations, but we're seeing with the process of globalization that the role of nation states seems to be diminishing because the global marketplace is being governed by self-regulation, which means there's no real control except by the players themselves. And we have this idea that there are no external regulators. And I think, again, we cast our minds back to the global financial crisis where there's these major multinational corporations who were actually regulating the market themselves. And you can see here that the potential for intervention was actually fairly minimal. And we ended up with a major problem, which, as it turned out, the nation states were then asked to bail the multinational corporations out. So it really is a matter of the nation states were taking all the risk, and if there were any benefit, the multinational corporations were enjoying that benefit. So there's reduced capacity to regulate the market, and there's reduced capacity to balance the interests of private capital with broader national social issues. So the emphasis on private gain and private interest. And that, when we're thinking about health promotion, this really is the antithesis of health promotion, because it very much secures the future of a very small minority of wealthy people at the expense of the broader community. But when we look at globalization and transnational corporations, we can see that there is a shift in power and influence. And transnational corporations are becoming much more powerful because they, the transnational corporations can work across national boundaries. So if problems in one area, one country, one region is too much for the company, then they can move to another company fairly easily and avoid a lot of regulation. So they operate across national boundaries, very much the epitome. They epitomize globalization, and they are the primary operators within the global economy and the primary beneficiaries, essentially. So if we look at what transnational corporations actually own, why they have substantial influence, is that they hold a lot of intellectual property. So intellectual property, 90% of all technology and product patents are owned by transnational corporations, not government, and they're not public. 70% of world trade is governed by transnational corporations. If we think about economic units, 50% of the largest economic units in the world are now transnational corporations. So some of them are actually bigger than nation states themselves in terms of national turnover and wealth, indeed. And we can see here that if we are looking at maybe even 15 years ago, the transnational corporations were emerging and much more prominent now. But you can see here that only 70 nations had as much turnover as 400 transnational corporations. So you can see here that what this point means is that many of the transnational corporations were actually bigger than nation states in terms of wealth and national turnover. And as I said at the start of this clip, the transnational corporations' mandate is to maximize profit. They've got allegiance to profit and also to shareholders, and they don't have allegiance to any one state or population or community. So transnational corporations are attracted to the same place that capital is attracted to, and they're attracted to where production costs are low, where there's a potential for the highest profit. They like to outsource to region where social and environmental regulation is less stringent, and also there's less rigorous social and environmental regulation, and that's rewarded in terms of, what sweatshops are. They're areas where people are paid very much, they're under slavery conditions to work for very small amounts of money, and also there's no restriction on the amount of pollution. So there are clear environments where transnational corporations actually flourish. You can see here from this graph that if we're looking at the percentage of manufacturing that's occurring in the world, over this period of 40 years, you can see that the manufacturing activity has progressed quite substantially in developing countries, and this is largely a question of because the labour is cheap there, and also the environmental protection is actually quite lax. So some people have called this the race to the bottom, is that the transnational corporations like to move production, not profit, but production offshore, where labour and other production costs are the lowest. And that means that there's pressure on the more regulated nations because they're priced out of the market, and so these nations and populations must therefore try to meet the market. So try to change the laws in their own countries so that the transnational corporations will come back to them. And what that does, the net effect of that is governments are forced to implement policies and strategies that undermine working conditions, undermine the health of the environment. And one might ask the question, well, why? Why do we need transnational corporations within particular economic environments and zones? It's quite a legitimate question, and there's no clear answer to that. But what happens is that if governments don't cater to the needs of transnational corporations, then they take their business offshore, which is seen to be quite a detrimental result for the economies of developed nations.